Welcome into This is Baseball. My name is Brandon Johnson, and today's episode is about the history of baseball in Kansas City. Obviously, we all know and love the Kansas City Royals, who have been the Major League Baseball team since 1969 in the city. Well, before the Royals, there were a lot of teams that came before them. And we know about the A's time in Kansas City, and we know about the Kansas City Monarchs, but there were teams well before them that spent a little bit of time in Kansas City that I want to get into. So to get started on this episode, we're going to have to go all the way back to 1886. In 1886, there was a baseball team in Kansas City called the Kansas City Cowboys. They were in the National League. Now, they only lasted one season, and according to Baseball Almanac, they played 121 games during the regular season, and they finished with a record of 30-91. Finished 7th place in the National League, which that is a rough season. That is a .248 winning percentage. That is a worse winning percentage than the 2024 Chicago White Sox. That Chicago White Sox team last year finished with a record of 41-121, which is the worst statistical record in Major League Baseball history, but their winning percentage was .253. Obviously, they played more games than the Kansas City Cowboys, which gives them a chance at a better winning percentage, but nonetheless, a .248 winning percentage at a record of 30-91 for the 1886 Cowboys. They were not the worst team in the 1886 season, though. They were better than the 8th place Washington Nationals, different than the Washington Nationals that we know today. That Nationals team was sometimes known as the Statesmen or the Senators, and they were only around for 4 years. But let's get back to the Kansas City Cowboys. Let's look at some of their lineup. Some of their roster. So here's just from baseballreference.com, 1 through 9. Their catcher, this is a baseball name if I ever saw one, Fatty Briotti. Their first baseman, Max McQuarrie. Second base, Al Myers. Al Myers looks like one of the better players on the team. He led the team in average in 1886 with a .277 average, .309 on base percentage, and led the team in home runs with 4. If you're leading the team with 4 home runs throughout an entire season in today's game, you probably didn't have a very good year. Their shortstop was Charlie Bassett. He was the other player on this roster that seemed to have a pretty good season as well, a 1.6 WAR, which led the team, a .260 batting average, which is second on the team, .331 on base, which was the highest, and he had the highest OPS, and it wasn't even close at .711. Moving down the list, the third baseman, Jim Donnelly, outfield, Paul Radford, Dave Rowe, Jim Lilly. And I think something that's kind of funny when I'm looking at this is looking at some players' handedness, like Max McQuarrie, the first baseman, bats unknown, throws unknown. So there's just not a lot that we know about these guys. But it makes it kind of interesting. Like Fatty Briotti, didn't know if he was left-handed or right-handed at bat, but we knew that he threw right. Let's look at their pitchers because this is a little bit crazy to look at. They had 6 pitchers on their roster. Looks like maybe 3 starters, 3 relievers. Not 100% how it worked in 1886, but let's just look at them. So George Weidman is the first pitcher on my list to look at. And here's an innings total that is going to absolutely blow your mind. So according to Baseball Reference, George Weidman threw 427 2/3 innings in 1886. And he went 12-36. He had a 4.52 ERA. Gave up 549 hits that year, which was the worst in the league, and gave up 215 earned runs. And again, only give up 11 home runs. Like, the power was just not a thing back in that day and age. 112 walks. Jim Whitney, another pitcher on the list, 393 innings. 12-32 was his record. Pete Conway, 5.75 ERA. 180 innings pitched. Silver King, great baseball name. Larry McKeon, Jim Lilly. Larry McKeon had a 10.71 ERA. Only appeared in 3 games. His whip was 2.4, if that's an indication of how that went for him. Obviously, 3 games isn't a big sample size, but still, looking at some of these old stats is pretty crazy. It would probably take a starter in today's game 3-ish years to hit that mark of innings, as I think today's starters pitch on average probably 150 innings a year. I think they pitch 5 or 6 innings per start at this point, so take them about 3 years to get there. Now let's look at where the Kansas City Cowboys played. They played at a stadium called Association Park. It was initially known as League Park, and it was built in a low area that was once a pond. This is according to Wikipedia, and it became a heat sink during the peak of summer and became known as the Hole. Continuing on, it was on a block bounded by Lydia Avenue, 6th Street, which is now Admiral Boulevard, John Street and Tracy Avenue, and Independence Avenue. It became easily known as one of the worst parks because, like I said, it sat low and it would accumulate smelly, swampy water, and obviously that's a disgusting atmosphere. Anyway, the Kansas City Cowboys only lasted that one season in 1886, which is 100 years before I was born. Jeez. Though they did leave the National League, they were part of the American Association for a couple more years before they folded. Now let's move on to the Kansas City Blues. The Blues were a minor league team located in KC, and they were one of the founding members of the American Association. The Blues were first an affiliate of the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1935, and they were affiliates of the New York Yankees from 1936 to 1954, but they weren't affiliated with anyone for a very long time. So the Blues got going in the late 1800s as well. In 1888, they were league champs. Same thing in 1890. 1898, league champs. 1901, same thing. They were managed by somebody named Jim Manning at that time during their success. He was a former major leaguer who played for the Detroit Wolverines, which is a team that existed between 1881 and 1888. That Detroit Wolverines team actually won the World Series in 1887. They finished with a record of 79, 45, and 3 over the St. Louis Browns. Unfortunately, I'm unable to find a roster for the Kansas City Blues. It kind of gets a little fuzzy there. I guess there was a Kansas City Blues football team at one point as well. But let's look at where the Kansas City Blues played. They played at a place called Association Park 2. And they played there from 1903 to 1923. The Kansas City Monarchs played there a little bit as well. They played there from 1920 to 1923. In this version of Association Park sat in a block of Prospect Avenue, East 20th Street, Olive Street, and railroad tracks, according to Wikipedia. And here's some outfield dimensions. So to left field, it was 330 feet. Straightaway center field, it would have been 440 feet. I believe the furthest center field is from home plate in today's game is in Detroit. I think it's 412 feet at Comerica Park. And then to right field, it was 290. Missouri and Kansas used to play their border showdown games at Association Park. The park isn't there anymore. It's actually been converted to a park called Blues Park. So the Kansas City Blues would be a baseball team until 1954. They stopped operating when the Philadelphia A's moved to Kansas City. That's all I have for today's episode of This Is Baseball. I will be doing more stuff like this and kind of looking at the history of teams and cities and everything that went on before what we know now. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.